Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump defending his tariff threats on Beijing as a national security lifeline. This comes one day after the Supreme Court heard arguments over his sweeping tariffs, and the president unveiling deals to slash obesity drug prices amid a national health crisis. Mario Tsu at the White House. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he refuses to make backroom deals with Democratic leadership and hopes Democrats will take the off-ramp and help reopen the government. Luis Martinez has the latest from Capitol Hill. Many major U.S. airports will be affected by a decrease in flights starting tomorrow. And Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy comments on what Thanksgiving travel could look like. Jason Blair reports. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will not seek re-election. A video announcement from the first female House Speaker concluding her 4-decade political career.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump, just one day after Supreme Court arguments on his sweeping global tariffs, is doubling down, labeling the case the most important in the history of our country and spotlighting his tariff threats against Beijing as a national security lifeline that forced Xi Jinping to the bargaining table. And the president announcing fresh deals to expand coverage and reduce prices of weight loss drugs. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Tsu at the White House. Good evening, Mari. What is the president's latest take on his tariff case?
Tiff, good evening to you. When asked by a reporter in the Oval today if he has a plan if the Supreme Court ultimately does not rule in favor of his global tariffs, President Trump says that he'll have to develop a game to plan. However, the president also says that he doesn't want to discuss the possibility of that quite yet with the press and emphasizes that it will be, quote, devastating if he loses that ruling, having called it a case of life or death for the U.S. Let's take a look at what the president has to say. Watch.
I think it's the most important case maybe in the history of our country.
President Trump, a day after the Supreme Court heard oral arguments considering the legality of his global tariffs, emphasizes the relationship between economic strength and national security.
So much evolves around tariffs as a defensive mechanism for our country, as national security for our countries.
Repeatedly citing his recent use of 100% tariff threats levied against Beijing as instrumental in getting Xi Jinping to ease rare earth export controls.
If you look at China, by putting a large 100% tariff over and above the tariffs they already paid, they came to the table with the 100%. I was able to do it instantaneously when we were threatened by the rare earths. Yes, it was a matter of seconds. We would have had not nearly the defense that we had. It would be somewhat catastrophic for our country.
Meanwhile, President Trump unveils a deal to lower costs on obesity drugs Zepbound and Wegovy.
The American public, because of this agreement, will lose 125 million pounds by this time next year. Well, it is going to have dramatic effects on human health in this country.
The deal with the drug companies Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly also broadens the coverage of the drugs for those on Medicare and Medicaid.
Co-pays for Medicare patients will be as low as $50. Now you're talking about from $1,350 to $50. This is tremendous news for the American seniors.
And on foreign affairs, President Trump is set to meet with all 5 leaders of the Central Asian countries to talk rare earths and security issues. This is as the U.S. seeks to gain influence in the Central Asian region, which is increasingly courted by China. And during this meeting, the president of Kazakhstan is expected to announce that his country will now be the latest to join the Abraham Accords. Tiff, back to you.
All right, Mari, thanks for those updates. The Trump administration will have to fully fund SNAP benefits amid the government shutdown. This is according to today's ruling from a federal judge in Rhode Island. U.S. District Court Judge John McConnell Jr. ruled that the Trump administration must find the money by Friday. Last week, the Department of Agriculture agreed to cover 65% of SNAP benefits using an emergency fund. This came after 2 judges ordered the government to pay at least partial benefits. Today's ruling means the USDA will have to spend $8 billion on food stamps for November. The judge said that there are consequences if the Trump administration only partially funds SNAP, and that those who rely on the benefits might be harmed. Food stamps reach 42 million people, or 1 in 8 Americans. Republicans offer several off-ramps to Democrats in order to end the government shutdown, but Democrats insist on their maximalist demands despite being in the minority. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Martinez, has more on the story.
I think talks continue to be productive, and hopefully we can get to a resolution. I think we need to get government back up. We need to make sure that people are getting their benefits so they can continue to eat. We need to make sure that airports are open and air traffic controllers are getting paid.
Moderate Democratic senators had shown optimism on a potential deal to end the government shutdown, a vote on a continuing resolution through early next year, a vote on a trio of appropriations bills, and the promise of a vote on the permanent extension of the Affordable Care Act healthcare subsidies.
We're ready, we're willing, we're able to sit down with our Republican colleagues anytime, any place, in order to reopen the government, to find a bipartisan path forward.
Despite the initial optimism, Democratic leadership is still demanding guarantees to extend the Affordable Care Act healthcare subsidies.
I can tell you honestly, I'm less optimistic this morning than I was yesterday, because we were hearing that there were some common sense centrist Democrats who were talking to Republicans, but what I understand is that Chuck Schumer has pulled them back from that. And
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has made it clear that he will not guarantee the passage of any bill through backroom deals or circumvent the regular appropriations process.
Settling for some kind of vague promise about a vote in the future on some indeterminate bill without any definite inclusion in the law, I think, is a mistake.
I'm not promising anybody anything. I'm going to let this process play out. I'll tell you what they wanted. I'll tell you what Schumer and Jeffries wanted. In fact, Chuck Schumer said it publicly and decried that Thune and I would not go in a back room with them and make a four corners agreement on Obamacare subsidies.
Democrats have openly argued that the government shutdown is their only leverage to force their policy priorities on Congress.
The Democrats will tell you that they're feeling emboldened. They're feeling emboldened because they had a few blue state election results. It does not change the fact that they have walked their party off a cliff with no parachute and no path forward.
Republicans have also offered to rehire all federal workers that were laid off during reductions in force during the government shutdown, but Democrats maintain their maximalist demands. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
As the government shutdown continues, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago are among the 40 airports that will be affected by a reduction in flights starting on Friday. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says that if air traffic controllers continue to be unpaid, holiday travel could get rough. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
Starting Friday, 40 airports will be affected by a 10% reduction in flights. Most major airports made the list, including here at Reagan Washington National. Some others include Los Angeles International, John F. Kennedy International in New York, Denver International in Colorado, Harry Reid International in Las Vegas, Chicago O'Hare in Illinois, and Dallas-Fort Worth in Texas. The FAA has already been delaying flights at times when airports or other FAA facilities are short on controllers. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy tells Fox and Friends that after looking at the data, the department decided that a reduction in flights would be best.
Taking 10% of the flights out will reduce that pressure, which is what we want to do. Now, does that mean there's going to be no delays? No, Brian, there's potentially still going to be delays.
Duffy says that air traffic controllers are not getting paid and, quote, they've all told me it's really hard. He says that if things don't change with the shutdown, there could be travel disruption moving into the holidays.
And as we come into Thanksgiving, if we're still in the shutdown posture, it's going to be rough out there, really rough.
Some airlines have said that they will be working to try to minimize traveler impact. United Airlines said that it would focus the cuts on smaller regional routes that use smaller planes. Some travelers could be notified about cancellations as early as Thursday. Jason Blair, NTD News.
After decades in Congress, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announces she will retire in 2027. While Democrats hail her legacy, President Trump says she's done great damage to the country. NTD's Iris Tao takes a closer look at the milestones and controversies that defined her career.
I will not be seeking re-election to Congress.
Capping a career at 20 terms, 85-year-old former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi announces she will not seek re-election in 2027. Pelosi's departure will mark the end of an era in Congress. She's first elected in 1987, and in 2007, she became the first female Speaker of the House.
Today, we have broken the marble ceiling.
As Speaker and House Democrats leader, Pelosi was known for her ability to unite conflicting factions of Democrats to pass legislation, including stimulus bills and the Affordable Care Act. She also has a long history of calling out the Chinese Communist Party over its human rights abuses, whether by unveiling a banner on Tiananmen Square 2 years after the regime's 1989 massacre of student protesters,
Freedom of speech in China,
or by regularly opposing China's hosting of the Olympics and pushing to link China's trade status with its human rights record.
Would improve there, democratization would take place, markets would be open to our products. But just really hasn't happened.
In 2022, she became the first speaker in 25 years to visit Taiwan, defying warnings from Beijing.
the world faces a choice between democracy and autocracy.
Pelosi's long career, however, was not without controversy. She had a contentious relationship with President Trump.
There are no votes in the House, a majority of votes, for a wall, no matter where you start.
If I needed the votes for the wall in the House, I would have them in one session, would be done.
Led to ultimately failed impeachments against him and created the House Select Committee on January 6.
To peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
President Trump on Thursday called Pelosi's retirement a great thing for America.
I think she was a tremendous liability for the country, who cost the country a lot in damages and in reputation. I thought she was terrible.
That's while former President Biden calls Pelosi the best Speaker of the House in American history, and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries says
Her tenure has been iconic, legendary.
Meanwhile, echoing President Trump's comments that Pelosi is rapidly losing control of her party, House Speaker Mike Johnson says Pelosi's announcement shows
The old guard has been repudiated, and the radicals are taking over the Democratic Party.
And now Pelosi's San Francisco-based House seat is opening up for the first time in decades. Among the current contenders are California State Senator Scott Wiener, who is openly gay and calls himself one of the nation's strongest advocates for LGBTQ rights, and Saikat Chakrabarty, a former chief of staff to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who calls himself an architect of the Green New Deal. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
A Washington, D.C. jury has acquitted a former Justice Department employee of a misdemeanor assault charge. The ex-employee had been caught on video throwing a sandwich at a federal agent in August. On the night of August 10th, Sean Charles Dunn approached a group of Customs and Border Protection agents in the nation's capital. He allegedly called the officers fascists and racists and chanted shame before throwing a sandwich at an agent's chest. Dunn fled but was apprehended. Lawyers for Dunn had argued the throw was a harmless gesture during an act of protest protected by the First Amendment. Prosecutors had said Dunn knew he did not have a right to throw the sandwich at the agent, but did it anyway. Coming up nearly 3 years after being shot in her classroom, a Virginia elementary school teacher has been awarded $10 million. She says the attack left her with lasting injuries and changed her life. Christina Corona brings us more on the case. And an appeals court throws out a lower court's block on a Texas law that bans drag performances in the presence of children. Arlene Richards has that story when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A teacher in Virginia has been awarded $10 million after a student shot her in class nearly 3 years ago. The jury found that the school's assistant principal played a key role in the tragic situation. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
A jury has awarded Abigail Zwerner $10 million after a 6-year-old student shot her in class at Rich Neck Elementary School in Newport News, Virginia, back in 2023. The jury found the assistant principal, Ebony Parker, grossly negligent. The complaint alleged that she failed to act despite repeated warnings from staff throughout the day that the student had a gun. Zwerner was seriously wounded, with the bullet passing through her hand and lodging in her chest.
I thought I had died. I thought I was either on my way to heaven or in heaven, but then it all got black. I see two coworkers around me, and I process that I'm hurt, and they're putting pressure on where I'm hurt.
The defense argued that Parker had followed procedures and couldn't have predicted the shooting. But Zwerner's attorneys argued there were multiple opportunities to investigate and to act immediately.
That's 3 times somebody is asking her to do this. 3 times. Countless times where we're talking about the boy throughout the day and a gun and where it is, but 3 times to search the boy. That should be flashing at you to act. That gun could have been popping up and down in his jacket and gone off. Handed it to a friend and gone off. Showed it to a friend and a book hit it and gone off. Dropped on the floor and gone off.
Zwerner now lives with the physical and emotional aftermath and hasn't returned to work while recovering from her most recent hand surgery.
I do struggle with doing things.
Parker did not testify during the trial. Both she and Zwerner resigned after the shooting. Parker now faces 8 felony child abuse charges, 1 for each bullet in the gun, with her criminal trial scheduled to start this month. Police say the student brought the gun from home. His mother, Deja Taylor, was sentenced to 2 years in state prison for child neglect in connection with the shooting and is currently serving that sentence. Christina Corona, NTD News.
The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals today canceled a lower court's block on a Texas law that bans drag performances in the presence of children. The case was sent back to the lower court for further review. NTD's Arlene Richards has more.
The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on Thursday canceled a lower court ruling that blocked a Texas bill from banning drag performances for children. A panel of 3 judges ordered a narrower review of the bill and found that only one of the plaintiffs had standing to challenge it. The San Antonio-based 360 Queen Entertainment had standing because it conducted performances that, quote, exaggerated sexual characteristics, which likely fell under the statute in question. The bill, called Senate Bill 12, was signed by Governor Greg Abbott in 2023. It makes it a crime to host or perform a sexually oriented performance in public or in the presence of minors. A lower court struck down the bill on grounds that it violated free speech rights. The Fifth Circuit majority disagreed and stated that most of the plaintiffs' conduct didn't fall within the constraints that the bill intended. For example, it said a vendor handing out condoms is not a sexual performance. The panel dismissed the claims of several plaintiffs and ordered that only the Attorney General could be sued by the remaining plaintiff. Then it sent the case back to the lower court to apply a different test to assess whether or not the bill violates the First Amendment. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The Supreme Court majority today has allowed the Trump administration to block transgender and non-binary identifying Americans from selecting an X gender marker on passports. In its decision today, the court lifted a lower court's block on the Trump administration's policy. A lower court had temporarily blocked the policy, and an appeals court declined to overturn the block. The highest court said in a short order that, quote, displaying passport holders' sex at birth no more offends equal protection principles than displaying their country of birth. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and Justice Elena Kagan dissented from the decision. Coming up, Russia says it's on track to complete the biggest capture of a Ukrainian city since 2023. Ariane Pazdar has how the fall of one Ukrainian city could lead to the loss of the entire Donetsk region. Israeli forces increased strikes against the Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon. Meanwhile, a newly released hostage opens up about abuse while in captivity. Jason Perry reports. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Russia says it's on track to complete the biggest capture of a Ukrainian city since 2023. Meanwhile, the U.S. continues calling on allies to stop Russian energy imports, which fuel the fighting in Ukraine. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pazdar has more.
Fighting between Russia and Ukraine continues to intensify more than 3 years after the start of the war. Both sides are currently battling for the strategic eastern Ukrainian transport hub of Pokrovsk. Russian media is calling the city the gateway to the Donetsk region. Moscow's forces have long tried to take control over Donetsk. On Thursday, Russia's defense ministry said its forces had advanced in Pokrovsk. They're now fighting house-to-house battles in a bid to eject Ukrainian forces from the city. Russia reports capturing 64 buildings in the city over the past 24 hours, saying assault groups of the Second Army continued to destroy the encircled formations of the Ukrainian armed forces. But Kiev denies those reports, saying Ukrainian troops are still withstanding the ongoing Russian attacks. Ukraine spent years before the 2022 invasion reinforcing a fortress belt in various cities. A senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment highlights the importance of Pokrovsk, saying if Pokrovsk falls, so does Myrnorod, and the pocket closes. In order to weaken Russia's war effort, the US continues pressuring its allies to stop importing Russian energy. Senior US officials urged European allies on Thursday to speed up their 2-year phase-out of Russian gas. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum is suggesting that EU climate regulations are hampering the progress.
I have great concerns, and I think the United States has great concerns about the EU in general, about the regulatory state that is just putting an overburden on it.
The US has also been calling on India and China to stop buying oil from Russia. President Trump now says the pressure has been successful.
How is the talks with Prime Minister Modi going on a trade deal, and when do
going good? He stopped buying oil from Russia.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announces sanctioning Russian companies engaged in resource extraction in the Arctic.
We are working with partners so that just as measures have been implemented against the tanker fleet and Russia's oil companies, similar actions will be taken by them against all the volumes of resources the Russians sell from the Arctic.
The sanctions imposed by Ukraine align with the 19th sanctions package recently adopted by the European Union. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
In the Middle East, Israel issued evacuation orders in southern Lebanon before striking targets belonging to the Hezbollah terrorist group. Meanwhile, a newly released hostage opens up about the treatment he endured while in Hamas captivity. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
On Thursday, Israeli forces reported striking a series of targets in southern Lebanon, including terrorist infrastructure and several weapon storage facilities belonging to Hezbollah's elite group, also known as the Radwan Force. And smoke was seen rising in southern Lebanon as emergency crews responded to the scene of the strikes. Israel said they issued evacuation orders to residents prior to the strikes. A local official shared his thoughts.
We are in a very dangerous situation. If things are heading this way and continue like this, then all hope is lost. No one knows where the consequences of these matters will lead.
Israel's government spokeswoman explained.
We will not allow Hezbollah to rearm themselves, to recover, build back up its strength, to threaten the state of Israel.
And after the strikes, Israeli tanks were seen near the Lebanese border. This comes as Lebanon's president recently instructed the Lebanese army to confront any Israeli incursion into southern Lebanon. In another development, Israel confirmed the identity of a hostage body returned from the Gaza Strip to be Tanzanian citizen Joshua Mull. He was a student studying agriculture in Israel, and he was there just about 2.5 weeks before he was killed on October 7th. Meanwhile, former hostage Ron Braslovsky, who was recently released, explained what it was like in Hamas captivity.
They stripped me of all my clothes, underwear, everything. They tied me up with, when I'm not wearing anything, like I'm torn, dead, without food, praying like to God, save me, take me out of this already. You're saying like, dang, what went wrong?
Braslovsky was held for 2 years until he was released last month. And in the West Bank, Israeli police released footage on Thursday of the arrest of a suspected terrorist. Israel said the suspect is believed to be responsible for multiple shooting attacks against Israeli communities and security forces. And about 14 miles away, residents in Bethlehem are preparing for tourists to visit the city for Christmas. It's believed by many to be the birthplace of Jesus. The city did not see many tourists during the 2-year war between Israel and Hamas. But now that the war has ended, Bethlehem is expected to return to its normal festivities during Christmas time. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, says a new country will be joining the Abraham Accords. Witkoff touted the agreement during a business forum in Florida.
Well, look, Abraham Accords are big. I'm flying back to Washington tonight because we're going to announce tonight another country coming into the Abraham Accords tonight.
Witkoff declined to say which nation would be joining the peace agreement, but a senior White House official said Kazakhstan would be the latest country to join. Kazakhstan's president is scheduled to meet with President Trump alongside 4 other Central Asian leaders at the White House today. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel in 2020 under the Abraham Accords established by President Trump. Morocco normalized ties with Israel later the same year. Trump has repeatedly said he wants to expand the accords that he brokered during his first term in the White House. And joining us now to discuss is David Wormser. He's a Middle East affairs analyst at the Center for Security Policy. David, thank you so much for joining us as always. Now, this is seen as a mostly symbolic move, given that Kazakhstan has had diplomatic relations with Israel since 1992. But what do you make of this announcement?
Well, first of all, it does build a little bit of momentum. I wouldn't say it's a massive amount of momentum, but it's good. It's good. It's the right direction. In the Middle East, when anything goes the right direction, it's a good day. But I put a little more importance to it than simply validating something that was done already in 1992. I believe that there is a block emerging. The last day that J.D. Vance was in Israel about 2 weeks ago, he said something about hopefully Israel can expand the Abraham Accords. And with the expansion of the Abraham Accords, we form a strategic bloc that then begins to anchor American and Western interests that allow us to disengage from the area to some extent. And I think now when you're seeing Kazakhstan is an important country in terms of energy, in terms of all sorts of things, and it's a big country, I think that you see the bloc that J.D. Vance is talking about is expanding, and it's beginning to gain real anchor.
And digging into that, officials said Kazakhstan's participation in the Abraham Accords would enhance their bilateral trade and cooperation with Israel. That is similar to what the Wilson Center said happened to the other countries that signed on to the Abraham Accords before. Talk to us about how the Abraham Accords have boosted people-to-people relationships in private and civil sectors.
Yeah, there's no doubt Israel is one of the hotbeds of innovation and industrial capability in terms of the new economies, in terms of what makes a new economy, namely high tech and so on and so forth. And yet in a lot of these countries, you have either pockets of interest in that, or you have money coming from other sources like oil and so forth. And they're looking to hook up with Israel so that they can get synergy to leverage the money they make with raw materials and other assets to essentially kick their economies up to a higher level. And on the private sector, private basis, people want to make more money with the money they have. So Israel's becoming a real sort of incubator for the whole region. And Kazakhstan's a different region. It's Central Asia, but it's really bordering the Middle East. And it also is the same. It's also a lot of old trade patterns. Kazakhstan's a very strategic relation. It's on the Silk Road. These are sorts of large-scale corridors that really are to our advantage if they fall to peace and begin to establish a basis. And finally, it's a blocking maneuver to China.
On that note, looking ahead, in your view, what other countries could we see sign on to the Abraham Accords during President Trump's second term?
Well, Indonesia. Indonesia is the big one right now. If Indonesia joins, it's the most populous Muslim country in the world. It's a country Israel trusts to some extent, which means they could form a real good basis for peacekeeping forces that the Israelis trust to put into Gaza or elsewhere. So Indonesia, I think, is the big one. But I think Indonesia also could provide cover for the other big one. And the other big one is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia doesn't want to lurch into peace without the Palestinian issue moving a bit further. It doesn't want to feel alone and holding the bag. But if Indonesia joins as the largest Muslim country in the world, this kind of gives Saudi Arabia cover and could help nudge them across the finish line.
And David, in terms of the Gaza Strip, we are seeing multiple reports that a number of Hamas terrorists are stuck in a tunnel network behind Israeli lines, and that the Trump officials are proposing that Israel use this crisis to develop a model to have Hamas disarm. Now, Israelis have yet to accept, and NTD cannot independently verify these reports. But what are your thoughts on this issue?
It's a tricky issue because clearly the Israelis, under an Egyptian proposal, would allow the 200 or so terrorists to depart from the tunnels and out to where Hamas is, or out of the area, but they would have to give up their weapons along the way. But for Israel, this is tough because these are deadly killers, many of whom tortured, raped the hostages, killed many of them, held these hostages. The Israelis want to bring them to justice. There's a lot of pressure on that. There's also the other issue, pressure in the other direction on Israel. There may be dead hostages in those tunnels still, and Israel is afraid that if they just say fill the tunnels with concrete and kill the terrorists, they may lose those dead hostages forever. So there's a lot of cross pressures, but there is a model here, true, where I think the administration's pushing it, which is let them go to outside the area, but they give up their weapons, and that's a good model for the rest of Hamas to give up and go into exile without their weapons and give the weapons up to an international force.
Well, David Wormser, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
New concerns about China's reach in suppressing unfavorable media coverage. The Epoch Times and NTD, two American media companies known for exposing human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party, were recently denied access to key Asia Summit events. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the incident, which happened at the recent ASEAN and APEC summits.
An Epoch Times reporter traveling with the White House encountered repeated roadblocks in accessing key press events in Asia, the latest in a pattern of interference linked to communist authorities in Beijing. Epoch Times is NTD's sister media. They were the only outlets denied access despite having received pre-approved press credentials. This occurred after a series of twists and turns involving communications discrepancies, unlikely tech glitches, failed promises of press credentials, sudden reversal of statements, and passing the buck. Epoch Times editor-in-chief Jasper Fokkert said in a statement, "The Chinese Communist Party is an enemy to freedom of the press." He called it deeply concerning that the regime could influence international bodies like the United Nations and ASEAN to block access for what is now America's fourth largest newspaper. Headquartered in New York, the Epoch Times has long been a target of the Chinese regime, from threats and intimidation of advertisers to physical obstruction of reporters. In 2000, its first journalists in China were arrested, with several sentenced to a decade in prison. More recently, UN officials barred its reporters from entry in September. The campaign has intensified. Hackers impersonating Epoch Times staff have threatened U.S. agencies. The paper has received bomb threats, and an envelope containing white powder arrived at its headquarters in October. Travis Gilmore, White House correspondent for the Epoch Times, arrived in Malaysia 2 days before President Trump joined the ASEAN summit. Gilmore had pre-approved media credentials. However, when embassy and White House staff went to retrieve the credentials for media personnel, ASEAN officials informed them that Gilmore's profile needed updating. Repeatedly, Gilmore said he found himself in the same cycle, being told to come back and pick up the press pass later, only to find nothing when he returned. On October 26th, the ASEAN staff told Gilmore he got a pass approval, but the credentials never materialized. Mariotsu and Chen Lei, White House correspondent and videographer for NTD, faced a similar situation when they arrived at their hotel in South Korea ahead of the APEC summit. Inside the hotel, a reserved media table at the press filing center bore the NTD logo, but APEC staff members restricted their access and stated they didn't have the pair's credentials. The media liaison team blamed a mix-up for what happened and told Otsu they had found her media pass, only to walk back the statement within minutes, saying the earlier message was sent in error. Neither APEC nor ASEAN returned the Epoch Times request for comment on the article about the incidents. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Coming up in the NFL, tragedy strikes the Dallas Cowboys as one of their own players passes away. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The world's richest person could become the world's first trillionaire. Tesla shareholders overwhelmingly approved a pay package for CEO Elon Musk today that has the potential to be worth $8 trillion. But there are hurdles to clear to reach that milestone. The approved package comes in the form of a stock grant that would give Musk as much as 423 million additional Tesla shares over the next 10 years. Those shares could be worth about $1 trillion. That's assuming the company reaches the 8.5 trillion market cap needed to have Musk qualify for the full potential payout. That's nearly 5 times what it's worth now. Also, Tesla needs to achieve a series of either operational or financial targets for him to get the full number of shares. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's turn in the NFL as Dallas Cowboys defensive end Marshawn Kneeland died this morning from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. What do we know about this situation?
Yeah, not a whole lot at this point. Now, state troopers in Texas tried to stop a car Kneeland was driving for traffic violation. This is about 10:30 local time last night in Texas. Police say he refused to stop, leading to a pursuit. He was able to evade them, though, before crashing his vehicle. He then fled the scene on foot. Now, after a search, he was found dead, though, of what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Now, during the search for him, officers received information that Kneeland expressed suicidal ideations. This is according to the police report here. Now, meanwhile, Kneeland was just 24 years old, playing in his second seasons after the Cowboys took him in the second round of the 2024 NFL Draft. He actually just scored his first career touchdown last week after recovering a blocked punt in the end zone. Now his team, the Cowboys, are actually off this week. They've got a bye week. Their next game isn't until November 17, but a very sad story here.
Definitely quite tragic. Shifting gears to hockey, though, Alex Ovechkin extended his own record with his 900th career goal last night, but he almost didn't get his historic puck back.
Yeah, it's too bad, almost too bad. Now, Ovechkin scored on St. Louis Blues goalie Jordan Binnington, becoming the first NHL player ever to get 900 goals in his career. Of course, it was a big celebration afterwards. But meanwhile, the puck they scored, of course, becomes a very valuable item. So, of course, what happened to it? Well, Binnington, the goalie here, during the celebration was caught on camera taking the puck out of the goalie net and then putting it into his own pants. Now, a little later on, Binnington was seen talking to an official. They reached into his pants and handed the puck back to him. Now, Ovechkin posed for pictures with the puck afterwards. Binnington, meanwhile, was later pulled from the game. His team, the Blues, lost 6-1 there. Now, Ovechkin was made aware of what happened but had no comment. Binnington said today he had full intention to give it back to Ovechkin. So, I don't know about you, Tiff, but I would probably ask them, wash, maybe disinfect it before handing the puck to me. If it was me, and even then, I'd probably be holding it like this or something if I was posing for it. But he didn't. Either he wasn't aware of it at the time, or it didn't seem to bother him. But
ice isn't sterilizing.
No, that's a good point. I suppose I'd still probably wouldn't be taking that. I'd still be taking maybe precaution. Just me.
All right, thoughts. Looking at baseball news, though, today is the deadline for players to accept qualifying offers from their respective teams. What is the significance of this, though?
Yeah, this is for those players who could become free agents. Now, if they accept the offer, which is a one-year, $22 million offer, then that's their contract for next season, and they're no longer a free agent. They go back to their old team. Now, most players reject the offer. If they reject it and sign as a free agent elsewhere, the team that signs them then has to give up one or more draft picks, though not their highest pick. So this system is in place mainly because baseball has no salary cap, and there's a big difference between the big market teams and the small market teams. It gives compensation then to those smaller market teams that can't afford, their best players. Now, just give me an idea. On opening day this season, both the New York Mets and the Los Angeles Dodgers had payrolls just over $320 million. Was the most in the big leagues. Meanwhile, at the bottom end, though, 5 teams had payrolls under $100 million. So they had 4 times the payroll of some of those other teams. This is the baseball ways of trying to counter it. I mean, those teams that lose their best players in free agency can at least get a draft pick back, but it doesn't really seem to help that much, to be honest with you. Though it's their effort anyway, trying to have some kind of balance in the system.
Well, A for effort. Looking at tonight's sports schedule, though, the Broncos host the Raiders in an AFC West battle.
Yeah, Denver hosts Las Vegas tonight. Broncos lead the AFC West with a 7-2 record. That's actually a bit of a surprise. I mean, the Chiefs have won this division 9 straight seasons. Chiefs are actually in 3rd right now. Vegas, though, is in last. Denver, a very good young quarterback in Bo Nix, and they've got a very good defense, allowing the 3rd fewest yards in the NFL. Vegas's offense, meanwhile, averages the 4th fewest on offense. So good on you if you've got the Broncos defense. This is certainly looks like a good setup for them. Denver, meanwhile, 9.5-point favorites tonight. The game starts at 8:15 Eastern Time and will be on Amazon Prime. So you have Denver as your defense in your fantasy football team there too?
I'll have to check. But I do have Amazon Prime.
Well, that's 1 out of 2.
Well,
Not bad.
Dave Azaz, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. Round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.